Results-based accountability, or RBA, is a framework for evaluation, accountability, and can even be used in funding. We use the principles of RBA in state and federal grant applications and to design our evaluation and performance measures in our programs. On today's Coffee Time with Masterminds, we dive into the practices of RBA and logic models and their importance in grant writing, grant seeking, and in designing a strategic fundraising plan. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds, a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. I'm Rebecca Tuttle. I'm the founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. If you're just joining us today, tell us where you're from in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you and appreciate you spending the morning with us. I'm joined today by my co-host, Peter Blakely. Welcome, Peter. How are you today?
Good morning, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. Cynthia is not with us today. She is at a training all day today, so we will manage without her. Good morning, Myra.
Good morning, Myra. So, Peter, we know that Grant has a well-written evaluation plan. As we dive into the practices of RBA and nonprofit leadership, can you explain how important RBA and logic models, as an example, are in designing your effective strategy as a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, so results-based accountability is a type of evaluation framework. And what that means is just how are we going to understand what we're doing and whether we're being effective. RBA in particular is about placing your program in the context of the community and its needs. So it's just a very simple and straightforward accountability practice, and gives you some guiding questions to discuss your findings.
That's great. As Coffee Time hosts, the three of us had presented at the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network Conference. And in our workshop, we discussed the importance of logic models in nonprofits, especially during the time of COVID. Can you share some insight into why logic models are so important right now?
Sure. Whatever your framework is, now is the time to get it out. I think sometimes, logic models or RBA or whatever your framework is comes up when you're applying for the money. And I know in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the very important reasons why you talk about it at that moment in time. But right now, in a time of change and crisis, is actually the most important time to have one of these documents, because it reminds you of what your program is meant to be doing and the change that you've taken responsibility for effecting in the world. So a lot of times when you're just going about your business and it's business as usual, it's okay to be focused on your activities. It's right now when your activities have been disrupted and you have to decide what to do or how to do, that you want to have a reminder of why are we here, who have we committed to serving, and how do we want the world to be a better place because we're doing these activities. Those are the kinds of things that are documented in your evaluation framework.
Excellent.
So what we talked about in the conference was, how can we take that framework and ask ourselves some questions and use it, sort of jotting in the margins to say, this didn't happen, this did happen, this is why we made that decision.
And then we split off into three groups, which I found especially exciting because each of the three groups had a different topic, which was one area of our expertise. So in my particular group, we focus on the fund development aspect and how COVID has impacted development practitioners as well as grant writers' ability to raise those right fit funds when they need them, and how much more activities are costing, programs are costing because of COVID. And I don't know if you want to share what yours and Cynthia's groups broke out into discussion on.
Well, we were talking about evaluation and strategy. And, I think what's especially useful about the RBA framework is that it gives you kind of a template for developing strategy. But by strategy, I simply mean like we do these things, so these things will happen, and we have some way of monitoring it. So when we were doing those exercises, we were talking about how you would either alter how you are measuring success or what your measures of success are in a setting like this, or how you would collect new data to answer new questions in a time like this. And the strategy team was focusing on what would we do differently in a different environment. So this brings up why you want to have these documents handy. You don't, in a time of stress and with a lot of decisions to make quickly, you don't want to have to reinvent history, right? You want to have some notes at your fingertips and some things to refer to. I think one of the most important things that I've learned since we started doing this show in March, I think, and talking to leaders about managing in a time of disruption is that I had always been a little bit dismissive of the inputs section of a logic model, or in other frameworks, it might be the resources section, or right, program partners, or whatever you want to call it. And I remember literally saying to somebody in a training, yeah, well, in the handout, the piece of paper was only so big and inputs didn't fit. So that's why it's not on my template. Because in normal times, it's so easy to forget about the resources that you are depending on to run your program. And I think right now has been a really good pull up that I need to spend a lot more time and attention thinking, what exactly does it need to run this program? And that's where you align your fund development or resource development. It could be partners and friend development right into your logic model, right? Rebecca, can you talk a little bit about that, about how you think about that section?
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing to note about resources isn't one generic thing. It isn't we need supplies or paper or pens. Resources is the program supplies. It is the people that you need around your team to help you, the partners in your work. And it's also the resources in terms of funding. And if we're not measuring and monitoring our fundraising as we're going along, then we may end up without the resources that we need to offer our programs and services and offer them in a capacity and way which people need them. So I incorporate results accountability for the measurement of our fundraising strategy and planning, but then I use the logic model to organize the fundraising plan itself.
Interesting.
And
you want to show us that?
Yeah, so there's actually 5 steps that I use to create a fundraising plan. And if you simplify it, then it helps everyone to stay on the same page. Because what happens is without a fundraising plan, I'm just going to share my screen here. Yeah. Without a fundraising plan, everyone is kind of off doing what they think they need to be doing instead of focusing on what we all should be doing together. So the first step in designing a fundraising strategy is to document it and make it accessible. Google Docs is a great way to update things in real time, share files, let everyone know who is doing what and when they're doing it. It really sets nicely that expectation. And then it allows you to create number 2, which is a shared vision. So you're clearly stating the goals in your fundraising plan. This is really important because everyone should realize at the onset, what is it that we're raising these funds for? What do we want to get accomplished or get to? And how can we make progress toward those goals? And then you want to share and update that progress often so that everyone is making progress towards shared success. Because if we break our fundraising strategy off into a document that, Peter, how sometimes you'll have an Excel file and then it'll be updated and someone will send it to you and then other people have different versions of that file. Have you had that experience?
We have a show coming up talking about this specific topic.
Right. So Google Docs is updating in real time. So if, let's say, for example, someone was going out in your fundraising plan and they were supposed to get corporate sponsorships, and they had an Excel file that was 3 files old, and they maybe didn't get that sponsor and someone else did. So there's a lot of confusion that creates when we are not sharing visions and documents at the same time. But also it can kind of create disappointment among team members because maybe they are not making the progress they hoped, and then other people aren't seeing that progress, and then they get a little discouraged. So that's why creating shared files, making them accessible with a shared vision is really important. And then number 3 is determining what the resources are. So what are some of the hard and the soft costs associated with hosting a fundraiser if you're hosting a fundraising event? What are some of the hard soft costs and supplies needed, and the budget for your overall fundraising strategy? That's really important to set up in advance so that everyone knows how much does it cost to do this, if you have to make any investments in technology or online resources, whatnot, if you have to make any investments in any of the tools that you need to actually carry out the event. For example, if it's in person, then do you need tables and chairs and all of those resources? And then what is the overall budget that you are trying to raise versus the budget that you have to spend on making that fundraising event a success? And then number 4, we're developing time frames for success. So from start to finish, what does that look like, and what are the benchmarks along the way? That's why RBA is so important, because we are measuring and monitoring not only the impact of the program, but the impact of our fundraising efforts. And then number 5, we're leveraging those resources and the funds that are anticipated and raised. So what does that mean? We can use funds raised to support our grant writing and grant seeking efforts by avoiding silos. So don't put your fundraising in a silo, your event in a silo, and the grant applications that you have pending and awarded in silos. You want to let the funder know that we have these other resources and other opportunities to raise right fit funds coming in, or they're being considered, and try to leverage those to open up additional opportunities. Because what we know from fund development is that people are more apt to invest in your organization and what you're doing if they see how it contributes to the bigger picture. So these are just fundraising in 5 simple steps.
I'm going to bring us back on the screen. So you are saying that the development team needs a logic model for exactly the same reason that your program teams need a logic model, right? So everybody understands what they're doing and why, and sometimes I find when I'm talking to clients, the only thing I do is talk to clients about how they're going to measure their program's outcomes, and how will you know that you're being successful? And I sometimes find there's a little bit of reluctance about measuring whether they're being successful because they think it's like a test and that they are going to get negative feedback. I look at the opposite. If you're not measuring that you are being successful, how are you going to know when to stop and celebrate? How will you know what to celebrate? I want to acknowledge some of the comments. Sure. I want to say good morning to Dr. Peter from South Africa, and good morning to Sandra, and good morning to Papa from Dakar. Hi, Renee, good to see you. And Madison has a really great question. She says, thank you for mentioning inputs and resources. What are your thoughts on external factors and assumptions? This is a section of a logic model I also often see overlooked or very standard, not customized to the program, a little pro forma, but maybe really relevant. That is a really great question. And I think it goes again to how there's so many different accountability frameworks and why different things are in different ones. I love frameworks that include a section on external factors and assumptions. You see it more in the international development field than you do in the domestic evaluation field. But I think it's super important in developing an effective strategy, and it's also super important in not duplicating resources. I think there was a time when a lot of not-for-profits or mission-based organizations were raising money for themselves and their own programs, And that's not necessarily the most effective way to do it, right? Rebecca, you can probably speak to that, that understanding who your partners are in the work and thinking about raising money for the cause, for the mission, and for the community is a more effective way to go about it.
Letting people know what the point is of it is really important. I mean, as simple as that. Why are you raising these funds? Tell me what the impact it's going to have in the community, and why should I make that investment within your organization as a donor or as a partner? That's really important. It's that connect me to your cause that more people are inclined to give toward if they understand what they're doing, what the purpose is. But also they're more inclined to return as future donors, because that's another way that you can leverage the fundraising strategy itself, is tap back into the donors who are supporting your work and re-engage them and see if perhaps they'd like to give again with time or talent or even their donation and resources. I think the reason why that resources column, to Madison's question, is often generic or blank is because we don't really understand the plan at the onset, and that could be because we maybe don't have one, because they're not very well understood.
Between the evaluation plan and the thing I often call the strategy map, which is a little bit broader, right? And so the strategy map is we're doing this and why. I think in the US, that correlates more to a theory of change than a logic model, right? And so having some rationale about why this makes sense is really helpful and important, right? It's also, I think, especially right now, very helpful and important because there are some assumptions about how things are going to happen in the environment that aren't holding true right now, right?
That's a great point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid of the strategy of the plan. It's got to be flexible. We can't predict how our donors are going to perform. We can't predict which grants are going to be funded. We don't have a crystal ball. So being flexible with your plan is really important, but all the more reason why you want to have that accessible shared vision and let everyone know what the goals are at the outset, create them together, and then monitor your progress along the way so that everyone can be accountable for the outcome, but also everyone can celebrate the success of the fundraiser or the plan itself or the grants that you're writing. One of the things that I find is a big barrier in fund development with organizations is that you have a person who's there, whether they're a grant writer or a development professional, and they're supposed to bring in all the money. They're supposed to bring in all the resources, right? And beyond that responsibility, unless you take the time to really get to know what resources you have to bring in for which programs and share how you're going to do that, what the plan is, then people won't really understand or be as flexible when you don't bring in the resources that you're trying to bring in. They say, well, why didn't we get that grant? Or why isn't our fundraiser meeting expectation? So I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for development professionals, grant writers as well, to have more dialogue with their organization, with their teams, with their board members, and their community to let them know exactly what they're raising support for, what the methods are that they're going to follow to go and do that. And then also, what are the outcomes? And you never know. This actually happened to me. So we had applied for a grant, a funder invited us to apply for, and we didn't receive it. And the funder came back and said that they're sorry that we didn't receive it. How about this fund instead? And if we weren't open with our communication around the importance of that opportunity to support our work, that funder may never have come back to us and offered another opportunity. So communication is really important in designing your fundraising plan and also monitoring its progress and being flexible with it along the way.
Yeah, I mean, just like the program plan. The reason that we document all of this stuff and the reason that I'm always encouraging people to keep it in public places and bring it back to every staff meeting is because these are living and breathing documents and they should be a basis for communication in your program.
Absolutely. I have a second page to this. Now,
Okay.
let me see here. So this is set up by appearance like a logic model, but it isn't exactly a logic model in the sense that we would design one for an evaluation strategy or within the grant itself. This is meant to provide logic to our fundraising plan or our fundraising strategy. So this is a really nice way also to organize and monitor our progress, and it ties in nicely with the 5 elements that I had showed you earlier. So first we want to list the activity, and the activity could be the fundraising event. So if we had an in-person event, another activity could be a campaign appeal or a direct mail campaign. Another activity could be an online fundraising, like a GoFundMe campaign or something like that. And with each activity within your fundraising plan, you want to have a separate goal that ties directly back to that particular activity. You don't necessarily want to have an entire year's worth of fundraising goals to cover every activity because it's non-specific. And Peter, I'm sure you could speak to this as well, that our goals are no good unless they're specific, right?
Right. So goal here, because to me, goal is one of those mushy words that I try to avoid using because it can mean so many different things. So what do you mean by the word goal here?
So for example, if we had, I'll just use GoFundMe because it's simple. It's an online fundraising program that we can use and we can raise dollars online. What is the goal? The goal of the actual budget, how much do you want to raise? Maybe it's 50,000. That is the bigger goal, but the specific goal is how are we going to get there by, if you come over to the columns on the right here where it says 1, 3, and 6. So I didn't put month or week or quarter because it all depends upon your fundraising activity. So in the first week, what is the goal that we want to accomplish in that first week? It's probably setting up the GoFundMe page. It's probably sending out emails to your donors to let them know you have this GoFundMe project going on. Another goal could be that you would set up the use of your email marketing strategy. So what is the specific goal that you want to focus on at the 1 month, 1 week, or however you design your fundraising plan? What is the 1 and the 3 and the 6 benchmarks that you can achieve that goal to make sure that activity or that fundraising event is a success? And then what are the resources that you need to do that? The resources are the GoFundMe page itself. The resources are the email marketing campaign that you're doing to let everyone know about the GoFundMe strategy itself. And then who are the team members? Who's going to send out the email? Who's going to correspond with the donors? Who's going to provide technical assistance support if something goes wrong? Who's going to manage the GoFundMe campaign itself? And then who are the partners in your work? So if you assign board members to reach out to 10 different people to let them know about your GoFundMe campaign, then what is their responsibility? And what does that look like? Do you provide them with a script? So a goal could be, here is the script to reach out to people to let them know about the GoFundMe campaign. The goal could be, here is the script to reach out to 10 people. What is the timeline for that outreach? And how many people are you going to reach out to on week 1, on week 3, on week 6? And then what is the plan for follow-up? So after this fundraising event concludes, who's going to send out the thank you notes? What is the goal of the follow-up plan? The goal is to have a closure meeting, or what do you call a closure meeting, Peter? I know you have kickoff meetings, but when you close a project out or an event.
Just sort of using the language of sprint planning. I call it a retrospective.
Okay, so
it's the where you look back over the project or the piece of the project, right? It could just be one chunk of work or something like that, and talk about what went well and what went less well and what could we do better for next time.
So that's part of the follow-up, absolutely. And then who's going to send the thank you notes? Because thank yous are very important. And an important distinction in your fundraising plan is a thank you note is not the same as thank you for donating. So thank you for donating is something that comes after the donation is made. thank you for donating is something that comes in an annual report when you talk about how much was raised. A personal thank you note is, thank you so much for your donation. It meant so much. This is what it allows us to do as an organization. This is the relief and resources it brings to our community. That's more personalized. And so who's going to do that? What is the timeline to get that out there? That's another activity. So I'm bouncing around this just to show you how in a logic model, these columns are very highly specific with definitions of what should go in each column. This model here for your fundraising plan has a little more flexibility because it's based upon what you're doing in that particular activity to get you to move throughout the steps within your fundraising plan to raise those right fit funds and evaluate and measure your progress along the way. So it's very similar to a logic model. We use principles and practices of RBA in our fund development planning at Grant Right Now, but it's not exactly a logic model that you would use in a program development scenario or an evaluation scenario. Wouldn't you agree, Peter?
Yeah, so this is mixing elements of strategy and project management and an accountability framework. And those are applied specifically to fundraising. Those three elements apply to everything, right? Apply to the program itself, to the organization, and on multiple levels, right? So when we're thinking about the entire organization, or it could be an entire community, or right around an issue or opportunity, and down to the micro level of one day in a program and what our targets are for that program. So, yeah, and this also highlights how important it is for your evaluation team and your fund development team to be in close communication, right? Because all that language about what your donation enabled us to do, right? Your evaluation team is helping support that. They're helping you write that language.
That's really important. And one of the scenarios where I see grant writers trip up is in a lack of communication if they don't understand what the program is all about that they're writing a grant application for, or they don't understand the measures to write within the evaluation section of their grant application. So don't be afraid to communicate. Don't be afraid to be flexible in designing your fundraising plan and then carrying out that strategy. The more we hold back and act as if, well, I don't really want to say anything because that just ends in disaster.
Yeah. Right. You can't deal with it if you're hiding from it. So, yeah.
And the only other thing I want to bring up is we're going to go deeper into this in my live stream next Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We're going to talk a little bit about planning your fundraising future, and we're going to take these 5 steps and really apply them and fill in this chart below to show a sample fundraising plan. So if you'd like to join me over there, it's going to be live streaming. So if you're connected with me on Facebook or on YouTube, then you'll see the live stream there. And then if you like these resources, my email is on the screen. You could always send me an email to Rebecca@grantrightnow.com, and I can send you these documents ahead of time.
Okay, so they can see that on your Facebook channel?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So similar to the way we stream right now.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. That was super helpful. I think what I took away from that was 2 things. One is about having development, fully at the table when we're developing programs. And that is, what's super important about that is that we don't want our fundraising to drive our programming, right? That leads to mission creep and programs that don't really make sense and aren't the best use of our resources, right? And so this kind of really close alignment between your development staff and your program staff and your strategy staff is really, really important. And I think we've just shown how it works, both the macro and the micro levels.
Absolutely. And it also shows how you and Cynthia and we are great partners in this work together, and a little bit of why we started Coffee Time and how it all ties in together. So I think that if our viewers follow us along these episodes, because we're coming up, this is our 28th week, correct? So we're almost in our 30th episode. So you could almost take elements from each and every show and each and every area that we talk about and really develop a nice, solid strategy for your post-COVID future. And since we're wrapping up the year, it'd be a great way to take some of these methods that we've shared with our audience and put them into practice come January.
Yep, I think so. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everybody. It was great to see you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.